Hi, and welcome to Build and Thrive, a podcast that is dedicated to improving the health and the happiness of the construction industry. I'm your host, Jenny Armstrong, and throughout our first series, we're bringing you inspirational individuals who are all on a mission to create a healthier and happier construction industry. So I'm thrilled to invite our next guest, which is Kate Cook. Kate is a nutritionist who has been working with construction companies for many, many years now, helping them understand the relationship between nutrition, health, safety, well-being and performance. Kate's also been involved in some research that's been looking at the lifestyle and the diets of construction workers and has recently been appointed as an ambassador of the Considerate Constructors Scheme. One of Kate's ongoing missions is about helping organisations and particularly construction companies understand the importance of breaks and how proper breakfast and meals should be an important part of any wellbeing strategy. So we've got a lot to go through today, so let's move on and welcome Kate to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Jenny. We were just saying, weren't we, that we haven't seen each other for probably 10 years. You haven't changed, may I say?
I've been looking after myself. The wrinkles haven't come to it. No, I know. We were talking, remember, 10 years ago when I first saw you presenting an industry forum and where the industry was then versus where we are now. And we'll explore that as we go through today's podcast. For those of the listeners that haven't come across you, do you want to just share a little bit about your background and how you got to working with construction companies in your career?
Yeah, so my core training is as a nutritionist. I'm actually the type of nutritionist that does clinical work. I had a big clinical career, saw lots of people. We used to call them patients, but we call them clients now. I saw lots and lots of people and about sort of 7,500, which in those days was pretty strong clinical career. And then I started to get people asking me to present to their companies. I specialized in what I call corporate nutrition, which is going into companies and inspiring people about the nutritional magic that can happen when you take in kind of optimum nutrition, which is, actually just good food, really. But so I've spoken all over the world and it's been fantastic. But about, I suppose, maybe, I don't know, time goes weirdly, doesn't it? I was going to say probably last year, but it was probably about 15 years ago or probably more that I had a sort of champion who worked for Skanska. I did a lot of work locally for Skanska in their health and safety days as the sort of slightly, what should we fill this hour with kind of slot, sort of the comedy hour after lunch, trying to fill in anything, those health and safety days can be a bit of a challenge to fill. Let's get the nutritionist in. So then, with that, I also did their health and safety conference a couple of times. And then from there, spoke at other companies. You know me from Landsec and other places. I sort of got into that groove and got passed around, which has been really lovely because I love construction. I love construction people because people are very grounded and you're doing something that's real, like making stuff. And so, yes. Oh, and then actually I did a survey, which was actually somebody else's main survey. They were doing it as a project within a company. And I got to do the qualitative research on social determinants of health in construction. I was doing the interviews, which was absolutely fascinating. Yeah. I do lots of other things besides. And now I've been appointed ambassador for health and wellbeing for the Considerate Constructors Scheme. So that's really exciting because that's quite new.
Amazing. Well, let's talk about Considerate Constructors in a little bit, but let's talk more about the industry and particularly with, you mentioned you got involved with some research. From a nutritionist perspective, what do you see perhaps the main challenges that we face? And I suppose coming back to our conversation before we started recording, why is the industry perhaps not understanding and addressing the issues as impactfully as they could?
Well, I think the first thing to say is when you do the qualitative research, which is the interviews, what you realize is that sometimes data can give you this generalized impression, whereas once you do the qualitative interviews, you see that actually you can't generalize about, so typically, I think people say, oh, it's the typical construction worker's diet, which I'm sure you've heard.
Bacon sarnies every Friday and we eat a fry up for breakfast every day.
Well, actually, the reality is quite different. I mean, so those days, because this was now again, probably 10 years ago, there were quite a few Eastern European workers at that point and from different countries. And so it's very patchy. But people with a tradition of making food and bringing it in and all the rest of it, you could see that actually the so-called healthy diet, they were doing that. Some of the other workers, skilled workers, British skilled workers in those days, they tended to be a little bit more patchy with what they were eating. But the main issue actually then was sugar. So it was how much sugar people were putting away in things like Monster drinks and cups of tea, obviously.
I see people drinking pints of orange juice in the glass bottle still to this day. And I mean, that's probably twice the recommended amount of sugar in one day that some of them can have, but they still perceive that as the healthy option.
One person had clocked up something like 38 teaspoons of sugar through Monster drinks and other drinks, tea. And so, I mean, and of course, it does have an impact on blood sugar, the way that the energy is stabilized throughout the day, things like concentration. And if of course you're working at height and you've got your blood sugar wobbling all over the place, your concentration probably isn't the best. And sometimes people not eating anything, but drinking those sugary drinks, so yeah. But it was patchy because you got another element of workers who were using their bodies. So they know how to use their bodies. They're using it every day. Their body is in effect. They're going to monetize.
Yeah, they're tools.
So they have to be, they're tool, they have to be physically fit. And if they are not, then they start to flag or other things start to suffer. Some people actually go the other way and are really knowledgeable about the nutrition space and things like going to the gym and working out. That typical construction workers diet is totally nothing, it's not a
stereotype.
Sort of truism to say that.
Yeah,
exactly.
And how, I suppose, from my experience, when I've seen workers on site, I definitely see a generational difference. I see the younger workers that are obviously spending time on Instagram and TikTok, whatever, and getting all of their nutrition advice, perhaps not from the right sources. But I definitely see a shift. How much do you think it's the industry that drives these challenges, or do you think it's the society challenges that cause the choices to be made not to necessarily be the healthy choice in inverted commas for those that are listening?
Yeah, I think it's a really complex thing. And I think like in Britain generally, we don't have a massive culture of food to start with. Whereas in other countries, there is, as we sort of referred to earlier with the Eastern European workers of those days, there was the culture of growing stuff and growing your own food, and even things like bottling, preserving, and some of these really ancient traditional things, which we lost in the Industrial Revolution here, where people were moving away, working in towns and all the rest of it. We're used to going to a supermarket, getting stuff. Look, what can you get for the cheapest amount of money, instead of looking at that idea that food is something more than just the fuel that you put in your body. It's something that binds societies, sometimes countries together. If you think of the Italian diets, people are very proud of their national diets, whereas we just can't even think that we really have a national diet.
Pie and chips and a fry-up is the kind of
pie and chips and a fry-up. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But even that must be quite relatively recent, Victorian, or it's not something that it's a huge tradition. So, sorry, that's probably a very long way of saying I think it's that we don't have that tradition. Other things are expensive here as well. So if you're trying to save money, which everybody is in this cost of living crisis, then you're looking for cheap ways, aren't you? You're looking to save money somewhere, and the disposable income that you can save is on the food. I mean, nothing else changed. Everything else is a fixed cost, isn't it? So,
and I suppose convenience must come into it. And I know through the research, we're talking about the importance of rest and breaks and the opportunity to eat. If you've got by the time you get changed out your PPE, you've got 20 minutes to have a meal, you're probably just going to go buy a sandwich from the supermarket, rather than actually thinking, I can sit down and enjoy a meal, digest it properly and continue back at work.
Yeah. Well, you don't have that tradition here so much, where we had in the old days the canteen tradition, where people would go into the canteen. I mean, they've sort of rechristened them so-called restaurants nowadays. I don't quite know why. That's just like, it's a restaurant now. Really? It's a really rubbish one, isn't it? So I think it's that. Whereas in other countries, in Italy, for example, you have the mensa, I don't know, sort of like the canteen, where everybody eats there together. So from the managing director to the lowest person on the or, they're sort of like the little moles who are doing the lowly work. Everybody's eating together and it's a great leveler. Here, especially in construction, it depends on where the site is. If you're in a town, that's great. You might be able to go to the supermarket, but you're still grabbing a sandwich. It's not something you've probably made and brought and shared. It's a very different philosophy. You're in effect going to the supermarket, grabbing something and eating it almost like by yourself, like Gollum,
off you go, yeah.
sort of, where you have a little bit of time to stuff it down, So it isn't that social aspect of eating, which in other countries, actually, I think it creates these social
Brilliant.
bonds.
Yeah. It's something that you definitely don't feel when you walk around a site canteen. There's a lot of research coming out talking about the link between mental health and food, and actually how much that might play a part in people's mental health challenges. The construction industry talks a lot about our suicide rates and recognizing there's a lot more that can be done. How do you feel there's that connection with food and your mental health, but equally how that plays a part in construction?
I think the trouble is that mental health is disassociated away from physical health quite often. Is this thing we're talking about is mental health. And I think it really is, I don't know, I'm on a losing battle with this one, but to call it the good health of the mind, especially in construction, we've got a serious problem. It's nothing to be dismissed and nothing that can be solved just by eating carrots, kind of thing. And so there are lots of those social aspects of mental health that are a huge part of the problem in construction. It's sort of working away from home. It might be money, pressure to finish jobs off. We were talking about one-man bands, not being paid on time, and all sorts of things that were meant to have been resolved. There are those aspects, not having your family around you, living in digs, having to get up very early, leaving wherever you come from and working in a strange place and not having social contacts. But also from the nutrition aspect, there are certain elements of diet that really play a massively important part in good mental health. One of which is fish oils, which is very, very well studied. The brain is basically fat, and deficiencies add up. Fish oil fuels the brain with the right type of fat. It's anti-inflammatory, and it creates not only good physical health, but eventually good mental health because it's making up the fat of the brain. And things like minerals like zinc, different types of these tiny little elements found in good quality food are key aspects of good mental health. We tend to think of it as like just shove that food in, almost like you're putting petrol in a car and the car will go. But it is actually about the quality of the fuel that you're putting in. So it creates a foundation. You see this with younger people nowadays who are on the energy drinks and stuff like this, or they're just bunging any old food down the gullet and think that the way to solve poor mental health is actually just take medication, which of course might be needed. Of course, I'm not dismissing that, but it's actually getting the balance between your physical health, giving yourself a foundation and a chance to achieve good mental health, and creating some of the social aspects that have caused the issue, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
You cannot have good mental health without good physical health, in my estimation. And that does involve having the right elements in what you're eating.
Absolutely. So I suppose it's really interesting to talk about the challenges and the opportunities to improve. But from your experience and what you've seen, in construction, but other industries as well, like from an organisational perspective, what can some organisations do, or what are some of the top things that you've seen that have made a difference and allowed people to actually start to make some of those healthier choices? Healthier again in inverted commas.
Well, I think it is leading from the top, which means if the leadership is not bought into thinking that this is relevant, then you stand absolutely zero chance of making a difference at all. So, there are certain companies who actually really do, or they've been evangelized themselves by their experience of changing their own mental health or physical health through well-being generally, like, exercise. I don't mean, because I hate exercise, but I mean, just like keeping physically active, keeping socially connected, the nutrition thing, yes, all of those things that make up the other parts of life, not just work. So if you get somebody in leadership who's evangelized that road, then of course it seeps down to everybody in the company. A good example of this is Graham, the construction company in Northern Ireland, which again, I can't take credit for, I'm afraid either, but but they are amazing what they've done in their well-being and, strategies, and how a lot of it has been about the social cohesion with the company, and how that has then had knock-on effects of creating an atmosphere of well-being in the company. And they've literally gone from, Michael Smith, he talks about how they were at the bottom of every single sort of scale of measurability in well-being. And actually, when they took on the well-being aspects, they've gone right to the top as being the best in their like Bupa groups and all of those things. So it can make an absolutely huge difference if the leadership is brought in to change. I think that's one of the things that has to change, because then you're allowing maybe a little bit of extra. I know everything's so tight at the moment, but a little bit of extra funding in the bids to actually make it possible that there is a canteen on site or a place where people can eat, sort of socialize and all of those things, as opposed to having to go out and get that sandwich. Of course, on small sites, that's obviously not possible. So it just depends on the job.
Yeah. And I do see examples where perhaps the catering facilities on sites aren't geared up for people to make their own food. The catering companies they work with aren't necessarily educated about nutrition. They can produce food in a way that is affordable, but actually, when you look at the quality, those things cost more money. If you want that type of catering facility, you've got to allow that in the budget. Where they don't necessarily see the direct impact of that, apart from people feeling happier, it's quite hard for them to add the value of how much this is going to cost versus the benefit. Again, we've spoken about it before, but the link between safety and performance, difficult to directly correlate it to the food that people have been eating, but there must be that factor there.
Yeah, the big example of this was the British Olympics, and Lawrence Waterman. Again, I can't take any credit for this either. But he's actually spoken about how he introduced a porridge program because they were having manual handling accidents. They were trying to mitigate that. People might be coming, especially after the weekend, traveling a long way, leaving in the middle of the night. They literally haven't eaten. They've been driving through the night or the whatever. And then they get on site and they're not having their break until 11 o'clock or something. They have not eaten. Anyway, so he introduced this program, and they were measuring the difference in accident rates because stabilizing the blood sugar, so stabilizing hormones through what you eat. It's funny because we sort of eat stuff, we don't even realize what's happening inside our bodies, but it's a complex array of hormones, of ups and downs. We're having to stabilize that by adjusting it internally. So we need to have all the elements there to stabilize the hormones. He put porridge in and stabilized the insulin, which meant that people's concentration were better, accidents go down, etc., etc. So yes, it does have an effect. I mean, I think it's one of those things that is very difficult to measure because people are wildly different. They metabolize stuff differently, and there probably are bigger things to measure than just measuring these rather sort of peripheral effects, maybe, that they feel are peripheral.
Yeah.
Which I would feel is kind of like an absolute baseline foundation of good health. But yeah, I think often in construction, we're looking at the end results. We're looking at the accident, obviously safety on site, and the physical things that you can mitigate to make sites safer. And probably we're still working on that. And so some of these more obscure peripheral things are much more difficult to measure or have put in,
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about human factors a lot in the health and safety world and how that contributes to incidents. I think there's a recognition that, someone's mental health not being where they would like it to be may be a contributing factor to accidents if your mind's not potentially on the work. But when it comes to nutrition, there might be some examples out there where companies look at it, but it's definitely not ever looked at as a, when did you last eat before you had this accident? Why was there a lapse in concentration? Is your blood sugar, and what have you been eating, etc. So yeah, there's a lot of learning that can take forward. Porridges, I'd had some initiatives before where companies have offered free breakfast to try and drive the right behaviours. What are some of the things that you do with organisations to try and improve that cultural piece around nutrition? And what have you seen that the workers have found useful, but also organisationally they might find beneficial?
When I'm go into companies, I'm doing the awareness piece. I think it's very important with nutrition that you don't come across too kind of like, I always say, waggy finger,
You
sort of
must eat
like,
your 5 portions of veg.
yes, well, actually, it's sort of simpler than one's led to believe about sort of, it's really good quality food cooked well. I mean, at its basis, as opposed to people getting into the detail about sort of, oh, I don't know, and especially different because, of course, if you're a construction worker and you're working on site, you have very different requirements than if you're working in an office and sitting on your bum all day. So you do have completely different requirements. A lot of what I do is around the sort of awareness, if you like. And I've done everything, as you know, I've done every bit sort of talking to the guys on the tools, who not even have English as their first language. So the communication is often me sort of being completely silly, as you know, Jenny, sort of messing around and making jokes and stuff. But it's a sort of light touch where people go, "Oh my goodness," and switch off one element that might make them change something. In terms of company wide, you can get local initiatives or patchy initiatives. It's the Health and Safety Week or something. People put on a porridge initiative, or they put on, so-called healthy eating initiative, but it's very patchy. So I can't say I'm having much impact actually, Jenny, so far. I'm hoping that eventually the penny will drop and people will realize the important connection.
Yeah.
But as I say, I think it is about the companies putting well-cooked, good food, good quality food, and have the accessibility for people to be able to engage in that. So
Yeah.
it's really, I think, mostly about being able to access.
Yeah.
You know what
Yeah,
I mean? If
absolutely.
it's not there, people, what can they
Yeah.
do? They don't have.
Yeah.
They can't make the choices.
Absolutely. And I suppose but the thing that I'm reflecting on quite a lot is that social element. And I talk with organisations about, they reflect on their socialising is going to the pub after work and having a party and celebrating someone's leaving do. And they always say, well, what can we do to bring people together that doesn't involve alcohol? Because that's not a choice that a lot of people still make, especially in construction. And actually that bringing together around food is probably something that everyone will enjoy. I don't think there's many people that say they don't enjoy eating, but trying to bring that connection around that food is definitely something I'll take forward as a recommendation.
Yeah, and I did some work for a big company, and I worked locally with this big company. It wasn't actually the workers on site, it was people in the office, but the person who took the team out to lunch almost every day was the most successful team in the whole company. Because when you're eating, you're open and vulnerable. Like, you're sharing something that's very visceral to humans. Something we've done since time began is sharing a meal together. And it's a very, very important part of socialization and getting the connection.
And getting people away from their desks. For those the office workers who aren't out on site all the time, again, we see so many people just sitting there eating their meals and need a break. Get away from your computers, go and sit down, have that time to eat, and give yourself the opportunity to enjoy that food rather than it just being something you've got to do to get through the day and carry on back with getting close to burnout.
The fuel
yeah,
thing.
absolutely. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Kate, thank you so much. One of the features that we ask all of our guests is about your own kind of personal top tips around what the things that you do. So I know we've spoken a lot about construction workers, so I'm keen. Have you got any top tips that keep yourself happy and healthy?
Well, again, sometimes I do realize it's a question of cash, but having said which, we don't go on posh holidays. We spend my husband would probably have something to say, I'd love to go on a posh holiday. We spend a lot of money on food. So a lot of the disposal income goes on food for us, and good quality food. Again, it can be a question of budget. I really get that. But to choose the best quality food you can. In my case, it's pretty much everything's organic.
Lovely.
Because it tastes better. And I'm a cook by name, cook by nature. I like cooking. I can cook. I'm also lucky because I'm freelance. So I have my life structured so that I put my food and cooking above any type of busyness that I'd want to get involved in. I'm absolutely prioritizing that. I am a nutritionist that does clinical work. So I do take supplements. And so the sort of argument is, oh, it's just expensive urine. But actually, touch wood, I'm 63, believe it or not. So I'm an old bag. But
Not at all.
touch wood, I don't have anything, it's not like I'm on any kind of medication or anything. So is it the supplement? Is it the diet? Is it partly attitude? I have a massively cheeky sense of humor. I don't take things too seriously, try not to worry about stuff. I live now in the middle of the countryside, so I like going for big
Lovely.
walks, and I have a dog. At the end of the day, it's only money. I know things are expensive. Everybody's trying to pedal very fast to keep up with costs and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, long life, happiness, and
Yeah,
kind of a bit of cheekiness, I suppose, is
I love it.
I don't know if it's a secret.
Oh, we've got to make life enjoyment. Life's got to have some enjoyment and a bit of fun. Otherwise, yeah, we can take life far too seriously. And the supplements thing is interesting. I talk a lot about with our clients about what is the research, what's the evidence base, and I know obviously with your background, the choices you make about those are not the ones that you again see on social media of some celebrity trying to endorse some sort of new thing. It's about the stuff that actually the research backs up.
In construction, I really tried to make this a thing, but it didn't really fly at that time, and I didn't pursue it. But I'm really convinced that the vitamin D would make such a huge difference, because whilst people think that people are outside a lot in construction, of course they're all completely covered up and got their gear
Yeah.
on, so you can't really get very much sun. There was a particular team working in electrics who didn't come out of the building for a year. They were in some kind of basement. One of the major things is the effect it has on mental health, which is vitamin D, mental health, and how people in the UK especially are so deficient. And it then has knock-on effects on all sorts of things, including prostate health and all sorts of stuff. So I'd love to make that a campaign, actually. Anybody listening out there who wants to, and you could measure that, which is what the exciting thing of that is that you could actually measure vitamin D deficiency, improve it, and then see if you have improved in other areas, including possibly mental health.
There was a research study that happened in Australia about tunnelers and vitamin D deficiency to see if supplementing them made a difference. I'll see if I can dig it out to find out what the findings were. But there was
interesting.
Yeah, I imagine. And again, putting my health and safety hat on, we were talking to workers outside, like put factor 50 on all of your skin because you're outside all day, you don't want to get skin cancer. And yeah, not necessarily allowing them the sun exposure to get to the right levels of vitamin D.
Well, it is safe sun exposure. And I think this is another thing, which is we've gone very typically how we do in the West. We just go the other way, which is like, like no sun, you like Dracula, it's like, But actually there's safe sun exposure. Obviously, nobody thinks it's a good idea to frazzle yourself. But on the other hand, you do need the sun. The sun is part of our heritage, and we do need some safe sun exposure.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for the discussion. There's obviously so much more we need to explore around the world of nutrition, and particularly in construction. Can you just tell a little bit to our listeners about how they find you? What's the best way to get in touch if they want to know more about what you've done and see some of the examples of the work and all the books that you've written? I did forget to mention that throughout the interview.
Yes, I am katecook.biz, but obviously, as we sort of alluded to at the beginning of the call, I've just been appointed Health and Wellbeing Ambassador to the Considerate Constructors Scheme. So a lot more coming on that, because the scheme is reconstituting the codes, and there has been some research we as CCS have done on some mental health topics. So I think that's not released yet, but as soon as it is, I'm sure it'll be out there. You can find me there, or you can find me on my own site, www.katecook.biz.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kate. So just for our listeners, thank you again. If you like today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. This is our first series, so if you've got any feedback on what we've spoken about today, anything more that you'd like to learn about, or any other guests that you'd like to recommend, please do get in touch. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you.